The desert did not welcome us. It devoured us. As the truck came to a grinding halt and the tailgate dropped, the heat struck like a physical force. The Arizona sun hung above us like an executioner's lamp, and the air shimmered with a silence so unnatural it made my skin crawl. I stepped down onto foreign soil with cracked lips, blistered feet, and wrists still raw from rope burns. Every breath felt like inhaling dust and punishment. I had prepared myself for humiliation, for cruelty, for the final unmasking of the enemy I had been taught to hate since I could speak. I had imagined rows of barbed wire, guard dogs lunging at their leashes, jeering soldiers spitting insults. Instead, we were greeted by a woman in a clean uniform with a clipboard in her hands. No screaming, no weapons drawn, just instructions, measured and indifferent. Processing felt like a cruel illusion. They gave us soap, they gave us beds, a mattress with real sheets, a wooden locker, a towel that smelled faintly of bleach. My body didn't know how to react. Everything inside me was tensed for pain, but none came. I clutched the bar of ivory soap as if it might turn to ash in my hand. Every small kindness felt like a trick, too sophisticated for violence. The others looked just as disoriented. We were 12 in total. Clerks, nurses, communication officers like myself. Most of us had never seen combat, but all of us carried the same stiffness in our posture, the same indoctrinated resolve. We had been trained not to survive, but to resist, to fall with dignity rather than accept defeat. I held on to that like a relic in the dark. When the dinner bell rang, my stomach twisted in protest. I walked into the mess hall expecting watery soup or moldy bread. Instead, the scent of roasted meat filled the air. My knees went weak. A man behind the counter handed me a tray and loaded it with food so rich and so absurdly generous it felt like a hallucination. Beef roast, mashed potatoes glistening with butter, a fresh bread roll, green beans, and a side of peaches soaked in syrup. I stared at the tray as if it were an accusation. Everything I had ever believed was being challenged by a slab of meat and a spoonful of fruit. I had been raised to see Americans as savages, as animals driven by vengeance and greed. Yet here I was, holding a meal more luxurious than anything I had seen in Germany in years. The smell alone made me feel traitorous. Somewhere behind me, someone whispered that it was poisoned, that it was a trick, a prelude to something worse. I believed it at first. My body was frozen, torn between hunger and fear. But there was no mockery in the faces around me, no laughter, no gloating, just routine, the kind reserved for equals, not enemies. I sat at the edge of the dining table, the food untouched, my hands trembling. The air in the room was thick with the weight of contradiction. I wasn't being tortured. I wasn't being starved. I was being fed, lavishly. I could feel my world shifting, as if the floor beneath me had tilted just enough to send everything I knew sliding into doubt. That first night, I couldn't sleep. The barracks were quiet, filled with the slow, uncertain breathing of women too confused to dream. I lay on the thin mattress with the taste of beef still lingering on my tongue and the weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. In the darkness, the food felt like a betrayal, not to the enemy, but to everything I had been taught. I had hidden a piece of steak in my coat pocket, unsure why. Maybe to test it later, maybe to remember the moment my certainties began to crumble. Whispers circulated around the bunks, uncertain and sharp. Some said the food was laced with something to dull our senses or break our minds. Others speculated it was a strategy to fatten us up for some unknown punishment. I found myself listening closely, half hoping someone would give me an answer that would make sense. But all we had were fragments of paranoia, passed between us like rationed cigarettes. The next day, the same meal was served again. Beef again. Butter melting into soft potatoes, peaches shimmering in syrup. My body wanted to devour it, but my mind recoiled. It didn't feel like food. It felt like a message. Not one I could read clearly, but one I couldn't ignore. I forced myself to eat, every bite a clash between hunger and shame. In the silence of that dining hall, I began to notice things. The guards didn't mock us. The mess staff spoke little, but with patience. No one hit us. No one yelled. There was discipline, structure, and an almost unsettling consistency. I kept waiting for the cruelty to reveal itself, like poison hiding in the sweetness. But it didn't come. Each meal chipped away at my certainty. I wanted to believe it was manipulation, psychological warfare wrapped in hospitality. Yet nothing matched the stories I had been told. No degradation, no humiliation, just meals, rules, routines. If this was a trap, it was executed with a kind of restraint I didn't understand. I watched the others closely. Some refused to eat. Some, like me, hesitated and then gave in. A few began asking for seconds. It scared me how quickly our bodies adjusted to comfort. The transition from terror to quiet routine wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like falling asleep during a storm and waking to silence. I wasn't sure whether I was being healed or hollowed out. At night, I cleaned the corner of my bunk with military precision. I read the dictionary Sarah had given me, one word at a time, trying to build a bridge between what I saw and what I believed. The words didn't offer answers, only more questions. Dignity, conventions, law, mercy. They all sounded abstract until they were served on a metal tray with real butter and hot bread. I began to feel watched, but not by the guards. It was something internal, an awareness that I was changing. The food didn't just feed me, it challenged me. Each spoonful asked me who I really was, now that no one was starving me, beating me, or demanding loyalty at gunpoint. I had no answer yet, only the taste of butter, shame, and disbelief. By the end of the first week, I found myself counting calories in disbelief, not from scarcity, but from abundance. The meals remained consistent. Roast meat, vegetables, even coffee on Sundays. I no longer hid pieces of food in my pockets. Instead, I finished every bite, wiping my tray clean like a child who feared being scolded. The shame of enjoying it didn't disappear, but it dulled, replaced by confusion too complex to name. I started working in the laundry unit, assigned to haul wet uniforms from machines to clotheslines under the sun. My hands turned red from the hot water, but the work was honest, repetitive, and strangely grounding. For 8 hours a day, I was a laborer with purpose, not a prisoner waiting for punishment. We earned tokens, camp currency, that we could exchange for toiletries, writing supplies, or even sweets. I held my first earnings in shaking fingers, unsure if they were real. On Saturday, I walked into the camp canteen and bought a tube of toothpaste, Colgate, in metal packaging, smooth and cold in my palm. I stood at the counter expecting someone to snatch it from me, to yell, to remind me I was a criminal, unworthy. But the clerk barely glanced at me. I was waved along, no different from anyone else. It felt like theft, even though I had paid. I began writing letters, first to my family, then just to the void. I did not know who was alive, or if my words would ever reach them. I am safe. I am fed. That was all I could bring myself to say. Everything else felt like a betrayal. I told the truth with such simplicity it bordered on falsehood. How could I describe a prison where we ate like soldiers? Sarah Tanaka became an object of fascination for me. She moved through the camp with quiet command, her uniform pressed, her face unreadable. She enforced rules without emotion, as if guided by an internal compass set to something colder than revenge. I studied her like one might study an intricate lock, convinced there was a hidden catch waiting to snap. But she never wavered. Not when disciplining guards, not when correcting us. It was her restraint that unsettled me the most. I knew her brother had died fighting. I knew her parents were imprisoned by her own government. And yet, she offered us exactly what the convention demanded. No more, no less. She didn't seem to hate us. She didn't seem to feel anything at all. That terrified me more than shouting ever could. One night, I sat on my bunk, staring at a blank page, pencil in hand. I wanted to write home, but I didn't know what I had to say. They treat us well felt too simple, too generous, too suspicious. But anything else would be a lie. How could I explain that the enemy fed me better than my own country had in months? I opened the dictionary again, this time tracing my finger along unfamiliar words. Restraint, justice, mercy. Their meanings were abstract, but their presence was tangible. I sounded them out in whispers, as if speaking them too loudly might shatter the delicate illusion I lived in. I wasn't sure whether I was surviving or being seduced. All I knew was that the steak still tasted too good to forget. It started as a routine announcement. We were gathered and marched to the camp theater without explanation. The room was dim and warm, filled with folding chairs and the faint scent of dust and old film reels. I sat near the back, already uneasy. When Sarah stood at the front and informed us that Germany had surrendered, I felt the world tip slightly. The war was over. But what came next was not peace, it was revelation. The screen flickered to life, and the first images struck like a blow. Starving bodies in striped uniforms, piles of corpses, bulldozers pushing them into trenches. I wanted to look away, but something stronger than horror forced me to keep watching. I had never seen death like that, not sanitized, not distant, not in numbers or telegrams, but real, with sunken eyes and twisted limbs. My stomach churned, not from the images alone, but from the understanding that these people were not our enemies. They were civilians. They were human. I stumbled out of the theater before the reel ended. The air outside felt no cooler, but at least it didn't stink of rot and silence. I made it just far enough to collapse behind the building, where my body rejected everything inside it. I vomited until I had nothing left, then kept retching as if my soul wanted out. I had never imagined this, not once. I had relayed messages and coordinates, but I had never asked where they led. Sarah found me crouched on the ground. She didn't speak, and I didn't look up. My hands were shaking too hard to wipe my face. I tried to form words, excuses, explanations. I had been just a cog, a technician. But nothing I could say would have mattered. I hadn't asked questions when I should have. I hadn't wanted to know. In the silence that followed, I felt the weight of complicity settle over me. Not because I had ordered deaths or pulled triggers, but because I had lived inside a structure that thrived on silence. I had accepted what I was told. I had chosen ignorance when knowledge was available. And now, confronted with truth, I had no defense except the bitterness of hindsight. Later that night, I sat alone in the barracks, unable to touch my dinner. The same generous meal was there, steak, potatoes, canned fruit, but it felt obscene. My mother had burned alive in a city lit by firebombs. My brother had likely starved in the rubble. And here I was, in clean clothes, with hot food, in a bed. My survival tasted like betrayal. When the Red Cross letter arrived days later, confirming my family's fate, I didn't cry. Not at first. I folded the paper with mechanical precision and placed it under the dictionary in my footlocker. For days, I moved like a shadow, empty, silent, indifferent. The food remained untouched. My body ached with hunger, but I couldn't force myself to eat. The steak might as well have been ash. People noticed. Jimmy Mueller, the mess sergeant, looked at me with concern. The guards exchanged glances, but no one said anything until Liesel approached me in the barracks. She saw what I had become and seized the moment to declare victory. "They fed you while your family died," her eyes seemed to say. "Now you understand." I said nothing in return, not because I agreed, but because I no longer knew what I believed. After the isolation cell, everything felt muted. The barracks, the mess hall, even the sky. It was as though my senses had dulled to protect me from further collapse. I returned to my duties like a ghost, completing laundry shifts without speaking, responding only when directly addressed. Sarah watched me closely, but said little. The weight of my silence was enough punishment, and she seemed to understand that. Then one day she handed me an envelope. A letter from a German woman in Tucson looking for her daughter, lost during the chaos at the end of the war. The handwriting was frantic, trembling with urgency and grief. Sarah asked if I would translate it. I said nothing, but later that night I sat under the dim light and began to work, shaping her desperate words into English with careful precision. Something shifted in me as I wrote. It wasn't forgiveness or clarity, just motion. Translating that letter didn't bring my family back or erase what I'd seen, but it was something tangible, something real. A human voice preserved in ink and passed through my hands. It was the first useful act I had done in months that didn't feel wrapped in guilt. More letters followed. Some were from mothers, others from husbands, siblings, old friends. Lost people searching for someone, anyone still alive on the other end. Word spread that someone in the camp could help. I became the invisible bridge between broken worlds, between languages, between ruin and hope. I translated names, dates, physical descriptions, addresses blurred by fire. One day, Sarah brought me a follow-up. The woman in Tucson had found her daughter. She was alive, living in a displaced persons camp outside Stuttgart. I read the thank you note 3 times, pressing my hand to my mouth as if to hold back something too large to name. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't absolution, but it mattered. The work became my anchor. I no longer counted the hours or marked the days. I wrote because it was all I had left. And in a place where time was measured by meal bells and guard rotations, each envelope that passed through my hands felt like a thread being pulled through the edges of a shredded world. I stitched, slowly, blindly, hoping something would hold. When a Red Cross representative arrived to recruit for relief work, I attended the briefing. They needed translators, organizers, people who could navigate chaos with calm hands. Most of the women weren't ready. Some never would be. But I sat in the back, listening to the requirements, wondering if the things that had broken me might also make me useful. That night, I opened the dictionary again and searched for one word: purpose. I whispered it to myself until it no longer felt foreign. I didn't know what it meant for my future. I just knew I wasn't done. Not yet. The day before repatriation, they brought us forms to sign. They wanted written testimony about our treatment in the camp, documentation for the Red Cross and for the records of history. I stared at the blank page for a long time, my pen hovering above the line. The words wouldn't come at first. Everything I had lived felt too strange, too layered to reduce into statements and checkboxes. But eventually, I wrote what I knew to be true. I came expecting cruelty. I was given steak. I expected cages. I was handed soap. I had arrived hungry in every sense, physically, morally, emotionally, and had been fed. Not just food, but dignity, law, silence, structure. And it confused me more than hatred ever could have. I signed my name at the bottom with a hand that no longer trembled. Many women refused. Liesel especially saw the forms as propaganda, a last twist of manipulation before we were sent back into the ruins. She still believed the kindness had been a performance. Her voice was sharp, her gaze defiant. But I had come to understand something else. Mercy doesn't require belief. It exists even when it isn't trusted, especially then. As we packed our things, I saw Anna crying softly, holding a photograph of her childhood home. There was no place to return to. No job, no roof, no structure. Just the shell of a country burned hollow by arrogance and fire. She whispered that she didn't want to leave, that the camp, as strange as it sounded, had become a place of order, of safety, a place where meals came without threats. I kept thinking about the word I had whispered into the dark. Purpose. It had carried me through letters, through names and places I would never see. And now it pointed me forward. The Red Cross needed workers, translators, people willing to listen, to connect. I raised my hand without hesitation, not to abandon my people, but to serve them differently, through rebuilding, not revenge. When Sarah handed me my departure papers, she didn't say much. She simply looked me in the eye and gave a small nod. That meant more than any ceremony. She had become a quiet constant in my life, a mirror I didn't always like looking into. Her restraint had shaped me more than force ever could. I had learned that mercy is not softness, it is discipline. I left Camp Florence with a suitcase and a worn dictionary. My body still bore the marks of captivity, but my mind had shifted. I no longer saw food as a weapon. I saw it as a symbol. A plate of steak and potatoes, served without threat, had done more to change me than flags or speeches ever had. It had forced me to confront the possibility of humanity in the enemy. On the train to the processing station, I sat beside a woman who had barely spoken in months. She offered me half a chocolate bar. I took it without hesitation. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. That simple gesture, like the meals before it, said enough. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to begin again.